Good evening, everyone, and a welcome from Cape Town in South Africa. I'm your host, Brigetti Limbanda, and with me today is Dr. Anthony Turton and also Benoit Leroy. Just introduce my two guests very quickly in case you are not familiar with them and you're watching this on the replay. We are this evening discussing Day Zero, the concept for Cape Town. Not only for us as citizens, but also for the business community at large. So to introduce my two guests this evening, Dr. Anthony Turton is a water strategist. He's trained in decision-making under conditions of uncertainty and risk as a political scientist with 25 years of strategic level experience. Dr. Turton specializes in water resource management at corporate, national, and regional level. His role is to integrate specialists from science, engineering, and technology with policy and strategy. He also pioneered the concept of water as a corporate risk. So my other guest is Benoit Leroy, and Benoit Leroy is a chemical engineer with over 32 years experience across many sectors. He has a wealth of experience in water, wastewater, waste management, and waste to energy and equipment. He's also got much experience in the industrial sectors. So let's jump right into our topic this evening. A big question that's on everybody's mind at the moment is Day Zero. People are following on a daily basis how the dams are doing, and currently we're living with Day Zero in mind, which is set for the 16th of April currently. So I want to ask you two gentlemen, most of the people out there are looking at that date, and the way it was explained to us is that Day Zero is the day when the taps get turned off by the municipality and people in the suburbs will no longer have water. Certain areas in the CBDs, businesses, to help keep the economy going, were told that they would have water. Can you please explain to us, Anthony, the concept of Day Zero as we understand it, members of the public? Is that the correct perception of what Day Zero is? From an engineering perspective, does it work for them to turn off the taps on that day, and that is the day when Day Zero starts?
The best example that I've seen of communication about Day Zero comes from Mr. J.P. Smith in the Western Cape, in the city of Cape Town municipal office, whatever it is. Okay, he's communicated, in my view, very well. Is Day Zero a specific finite number or date? The answer to that is no. It's a management decision that is made on that date when a certain threshold or target is reached or not reached. So this means that, unfortunately, there's now lots of different opinions about it. Is it good or bad? Well, it's both. It's both good and bad simultaneously. It's good because it focuses people's minds about the reality of the situation, but it's bad because, in a sense, it's a manufactured date. It's not a specific date when all the water runs out. So it's from a psychological perspective, I guess, it's a way of managing human behavior, but it's a very brutal way, because you are rewarding good behavior by saying, through all your good savings over the last week, we can extend Day Zero by 2 days or something like that. But by the same token, it can become a punishment now because you haven't met your targets. Day Zero is now coming closer. So it's a very brutal and harsh thing. I'm not sure that it's the best means of communication, but unfortunately, it's the thing that has been launched by the city. So it's something that has to be lived with and better understood.
Benoit, how would you explain Day Zero to the business community at large? Because there's a big stake for our business sector.
Yeah, so my view's a lot less scientific, I think, Tony, but it's I think the reality is that at the moment it's a warm-up or a warm-down for Day Zero. Warm-up in that it's a rude awakening. 50 litres per day is really not much, and that's total water footprint in a day. So if you look at the reality of it, it really isn't much. I think from an economic perspective, it's a serious cooling down. And a lot of the companies I'm speaking to at the moment haven't thought of the practical implications. The very big, large corporates who are involved with large water use are a lot more aware. But I'm talking about the other 90 or 95% of the business. The reality hasn't sunk in. So what, from my perspective, is 50 liters per day is day zero to an extent. I'm changing the definition because 25 and 50 is not much. 87.5 was a serious awakening, but really not too difficult. 50, 25, in my mind, are quite difficult, especially from a business perspective. And you've got to look at your customer base and at your suppliers and not just at yourself. So it's got to be inclusive in the economic sense. And I think therein lies the challenge. So look after your suppliers, look after your customers. If you're only as good as your weakest link, and your staff. So it's really a new triple bottom line, I think, from a water perspective.
Yeah, can I just add to that some of the things that I'm picking up? I'm also working with various corporates, and in many cases they haven't thought it through completely. One big corporate has just built a huge big container for. We asked them where they're going to get their water from, and they said they're going to get it from the municipality. But that's the whole point. When the municipality can't supply, where you're going to get it from? Then they said they're going to tanker it in from a farm, and then we said, no, but you're a listed company on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and you are producing a certain product that has to be got a certain safety standard associated with it. It's a food product. So now you're getting your water from a non-accredited source, and you're getting it. Did you know that you're getting it from an illegal supplier because they're not registered water use service providers, etc., etc. They hadn't thought about any of that. So that's the one thing. And the second part is I'm actually become aware of some people in the smaller businesses that are actually considering relocating their business for that period of time if they can. Now that can't happen to everybody, but if you're a consultant working out of your home, maybe you can relocate somewhere else. And I've actually heard that from quite a few of the sort of smaller end of the scale. So people are waking up to it, but nobody has really, in my view, actually thought it through properly yet.
Okay, there's a question here, gentlemen, from Andrew Grant Smith. He says, business sector construction, will there be a shutdown phased program set up as I'm in this industry? And for obvious reasons, there's a general concern as to whether or not there will be mass penalties or an end shut-off. Please give your thoughts.
Can I attempt
an
answer there? A lot of the construction water has been offered at a price, I can't remember it, with treated sewage from the city. And that source of supply is not secure, so it's at risk. So I think the answer would be is that you're in a shutdown. The extent we don't know. And I just want to add to that is, and I think I mentioned it last week, is the fuel security of supply we need from Chevron to know as to where they're going to get their water when Potsdam starts either the quality and or volume reduces drastically, which I believe they will feel this week. They do have a water reclamation plant, but it's from Potsdam. Do they have a seawater reverse osmosis or groundwater abstraction plant to tap into? Because I think this is something nobody has thought of, nobody's talking about. Maybe they're thinking, to me, if we don't know, nobody's thought about it, is the fuel is probably going to shut down a lot of the economy as we speak, because importing fuel into the Western Cape is not practical. There isn't sufficient capacity in the country. Has that been thought of? And so I think construction industry will probably close down a lot quicker. Tourism, on the other hand, will hopefully stay open a lot longer.
Yeah.
Anthony, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I can pick it up there. I watched a similar thing happen in about 2015 when the Hazelmere Dam in KZN collapsed or didn't have enough water. And at that point in time, there was a huge construction boom in the Rocks area, Belita Bay area. And suddenly they could no longer pour concrete because there was insufficient water. They managed to secure water from a sewage works, but unlike the Western Cape, they didn't have water restrictions in place. So people were not restricting their sewage return flow. In the case of the Western Cape now, by virtue of the fact that there's a dramatic decrease in the volume of water going through sewers, your water recovery at Potsdam has to be affected in a negative way. And in fact, there are other consequences as well, because the systems are designed to move a certain mass through the gravity feed pipelines, and now with the same mass going through, but with less water to push it, that's also going to start blocking up. So I think from a construction perspective, you can certainly anticipate delays. I also find it very interesting, and I don't want to point fingers here, but just very interesting in the context of this whole day zero concept, that there was communication coming out of the city of Cape Town, which I found very bizarre over the Christmas period, when they said that they were so on track with all of their plans, with all of their projects, that they could allow all the construction workers to take the full duration of the normal construction shutdown period. Now, that also spoke to me about the lack of any sense of urgency at that moment in time, or a complete naive view of actually how long it takes to establish a site to get fairly sophisticated plant up and running.
Next question is, sorry, did you have a thought,
Sure.
Benoit?
Yeah, my thought is maybe the latter one on what Tony is saying is, I think there's an element of naivety, and I'm not pointing fingers. What I'm saying is there's very little, if any, global precedence in a regional shutdown with 4 million people in an urban environment. So I think everybody is charting new waters here, or lack thereof, so to speak.
Our next question here is, will we see companies having to close until the water crisis has balanced out a bit?
I think the wily companies, and let's talk about the one brewery is going to do the Californian thing and start bottling water, etc. It'll keep people employed and the likes. So I think one can't generalize the statement. I think the less innovative and maybe less corporate companies might find it difficult to survive because they're on their own. But let's not dismiss South African innovation. It's just going to be, I think, a rapid learning curve. So from my perspective, there's going to be some casualties, but maybe not as much as we think. Although I think the 50 liters is waking up everybody this coming week as opposed to day zero. I think we're already in day zero from a business perspective.
The next question here is with regards to sewage. Could the city switch the water off or reduce pressure? If so, what would the consequences be? And then please advise alternative methods, for example, composting and how that works. I don't know if we can really go into that, but if you could perhaps expand on the possibility of, a lot of people are saying, can we not regulate the water pressure now? Can we not have outages the way we had with electricity, where certain areas get water and they switch it off? Is the Benoit, I saw you shaking your head.
Yeah, we're talking water molecules and not electrons. The simple answer is no. Electricity distribution is simple. Water distribution is not. And if everybody reduced to 50 liters per day, the system would stay pressurized. Those who use more, and if the city only provides the 50 liters times 4 million, what would happen is you start sucking air into the system, unfortunately. So you can't just switch it on and off. We don't have a smart network, electricity or in water, but water is a lot more difficult. And that is tens of billions of rands and a few decades away at best in our environment, I think. I don't know what you think, Tony.
No, look, I concur. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. What the listener needs to understand is that water and electricity moves in a fundamentally different way. And you've got to understand that. Electricity moves by moving electrons on a copper wire, on a conductor. When you turn something on or off, those electrons move instantly, the speed of light, I'm told, okay? In the case of water, it's not like that at all. In the case of water, you balance your flow out through a system over time. So if you are drawing more water out of the system that's going into the system, you change the pressure in the system. Therefore, some parts of the system now run dry. The air is drawn into it, And you can't just turn a switch on that's immediately going to re-energize that system as you do with electricity. So when you close down a system that's designed to be a positive pressure system, a number of things happen. One of them is that it sucks in air, and it could take days. In fact, there was a case in Gauteng where it took a few days to repressurize the system once again. And as the system gets repressurized, you get these big air slugs coming through, and this causes water hammer, and the systems are not designed to deal with the water hammer. It causes an enormous amount of damage and destruction in the pipelines. But one of the things that it does is it actually strips away a biofilm that has been growing inside the pipes over a long period of time, and it sort of scours out the inside of the pipe. So you get some really nasty stuff coming out as a result of it. So the bottom line is energy and water do not move in the same way. Therefore, you cannot just switch off a part as you would load shed and just switch it on again. It's not a question of balancing out supply and demand as you can with energy, unfortunately.
Thanks very much. So now moving on to agriculture, a couple of people have asked, and there's one question here from Chris van Wyk. Agriculture is using too much, ? Now, that has slowed down. In fact, they were since December, I think they were getting a reduced amount, and I think they've almost just finished their quota. Is that not correct?
My understanding is yes, they have. Okay. So how much is enough? How much water is enough? And you know, this is an impossible question to answer, because the agriculture in stress circumstances like this now becomes a competitor for the scarce resources. But agriculture in and of itself is also a very important component of the economy. Agriculture in the Western Cape contributes something like 43 to 45% of the GDP of the country. It's a substantial amount of money that comes in, taxes that are levied into the system that you're used to pay for all kinds of infrastructure. But the important thing is that they create a huge number of jobs. And once those jobs start going, if you cut the water supply to agriculture, those jobs start going, then you start seeing a multiplier effect kicking in now, because suddenly you start seeing people migrating from the rural areas into the urban areas in a tsunami, in a wave of refugees. And that now becomes the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. So I know it's a natural human thing to say, look at the agricultural guys, they're using all the water, and what about us people? But ultimately, this has to be balanced out. And this is where the central government comes in. That's their role. In terms of the National Water Act, that's entirely their responsibility.
Thanks very much. So Sandra asks, tying back into agriculture, why is the fact that agriculture is using less than half of what they used 3 weeks ago not factored into day zero? In other words, why is it not pushing the date out, since the usage has effectively slowed down?
That was already factored in. The way I understand that graph and the calculation on the dashboard, that was already factored in, that from late January, early February, the agriculture would be cut off. So that is, my understanding is that it is factored in. What's not factored in is the transfer from the Overberg area, I think it is, which is up to 20 days extra. But I think one needs to be cautious in that might just be the stopgap to allow us carrying on 50 and not going to 25 days, 25 liters per day.
Okay, there's another question here from Andrew. He says that there's bottled water being sold with high chloride content in it, 79 milligrams per liter. Is this safe to drink? And then he says the Woolworths bottled water is currently at 13.2. So the question is 79.79 milligrams per liter of chloride. Is that safe for human consumption?
I don't know.
Okay, look, all water is, for potable purposes, is defined by SANS 241. I don't remember all the SANS 241 figures in my head, but if it's being supplied by a proper bottled water supplier, then they will be SANS 241 compliant. I understand that there are a number of pirate operations now at play. I've actually seen some people bottling actually mine water, believe it or not, out of fire hydrants in the goldfields and sending it off down to you folks down there. So you've got to be careful of that. But if the water comes from an accredited SANWA, I think it's something National Bottled Water Association supplier,
Yes.
it will be within specification. And then chloride in and of itself is not really a problem. It just changes the taste a little bit slightly. I'm not aware that it gives you any serious human health implications. I'm not sure. I can't recall that it gives you anything seriously, on the scale that we're talking about anyhow, as emergency water.
I think one must also just differentiate between chlorides and chlorine. There seems to be confusion sometimes between the two. So chlorine would be a few parts per million, whereas chlorides, I agree with you, Tony, it's probably, if that was the only contributor, the TDS is probably less than 200 anyway, which is fine.
Thanks, gentlemen. Next question. Some users in KZN claim that after shutoffs, the air passing through the pipes caused their meters to run. They were paying for air. Is that true?
Ah, very interesting. Very interesting, because your meter has got a little paddle in there, and that little paddle, if it's not a digital meter, that is, and that little paddle is designed for the density of water. Air is less dense, so air moves through a lot faster. Your paddle spins around at a higher rate, high speed, so therefore you're going to get a false reading. So that's definitely a material factor.
So effectively, that is something that we could have a problem with in Cape Town.
I think it comes down to the fact that there's a deficit of trust, and that deficit of trust is growing throughout the sector at the moment. And we've seen it now with the whole tariff story and the whole the punitive taxes and drought levies, etc., etc. So until that trust deficit is rebuilt, I think these are legitimate questions, because people feel that they've been ripped off somewhere along the line.
True.
Okay, there were some other questions that that came in. I want to just cover as well. Dallas McFarland said, in my humble opinion, day zero means one thing. We, the residents of Cape Town, will be tested in ways we never dreamed of. The true side of each one of us will surface when we realize we have to compete for resources, in this case, water. Humans can so easily become animals, as we see worldwide, when their survival is threatened. I really hope that the city is geared up to handle the situation. Anthony, I'm sure you can speak to that comment.
Unfortunately, it's true, and I would like to think, the world is divided into kind of two categories here. Are people inherently good, or are people inherently bad? I believe that people are inherently potentially good, and therefore I would appeal to their good side to cooperate. And I'm seeing a lot of cooperation coming out of that area. But you're right. That famous book, Lord of the Flies, tells us just exactly what can happen, and one doesn't want to suggest these as spook stories, but absolutely you can get a breakdown. In fact, I answer this kind of question often by referring to the Chinese language. And the Chinese have got two interesting symbols. They've got one symbol for a river that looks, funny enough, like a river, looks like a thing meandering around. And then they've got a different symbol for a dike that controls the river, and that's square and hard and engineered and constructed. And when those two symbols are brought together, you get a completely new word, and that word means political order. So in other words, what they're saying is that when you control the flow of water, you actually control political order. And that's where the civil in civil engineering comes from. It's the foundation of all modern civilization. So once you start removing that very simple thing that people have never ever thought about before, you actually start impacting in a very fundamental way on the foundation of our modern civilization. So we've got to be very careful that you don't get a breakdown of law and order very rapidly.
Aisha Adams asked whether day zero will have an effect on our schools and government institutions. In other words, regular activities, will they be affected? Can we see a disruption in what's normal?
I think disruption is inevitable, but there is no precedent. So I think whatever we say is guesswork to a large extent. And I think this is why national government is busy with trying to keep law and order from a perspective of the military, etc., The problem on the flip side, I think, is when one once visibly sees a defense force there, it creates a reality that we don't know how people will react. But do we have a choice?
I think in the context of a service delivery failure, the notion of the government waking up or doing something more is actually quite an interesting oxymoron in a way. But I certainly, in the case of schools, I think schools can be very deeply affected very quickly. I have had some experience of that. I own property in KZN, and there in the Port Shepstone area, last year there were schools that were shut down because there was simply no supply of water to the school. And I've also been involved in a fairly, I don't want to say sort of a private school here in Johannesburg where they've also been through similar problems. And there they didn't quite shut the school down, but the hydration of the kids became quite a serious factor, and they were that close to actually having to shut the school down. So these are serious issues. In fact, the big issue comes down to sanitation. And I think what the school governing bodies should rather look at is having chemical toilets in the parking lot in anticipation that your waterborne sewage will break. And that's probably the biggest single problem. The rest, the kids can be sent a bottle of water from home, so that can be used to sort of mitigate the problem.
There's a question here from Sandra. What role does Agenda 20 play in day zero?
Are you asking me?
Is that a loaded question?
I was looking at Benoit and I was happy I was looking. I've seen a thing. There's a document that's doing the rounds on Agenda 21, and I have had some engagement with the people behind it, and I've been trying to understand what it is that they're on about. And I think Agenda 21 means two things in two different contexts. The context that I understand Agenda 21, it's a United Nations sustainability agenda. That's what it is, okay? But it seems to have taken on a life of its own, and I've almost, without offending anybody, it almost goes into the realm of a kind of conspiracy theory that this was all planned and this was all part of it. In fact, I've even heard that the word Illuminati was thrown in there somewhere along the line. And when I hear the word Illuminati, I automatically my little red flags go up. So it's a very serious issue in the sense that people are mobilizing around it. But I think it's one of those things that happens at the time. People start looking for justification for something that they otherwise can't understand. So I've just received 5 minutes ago, before I came on here, I've just received a long document on Agenda 21. Whoever wrote that document has gone to days worth of work to put that document together. But I'm not sure that I can buy into the concept.
Glenn asks, where did it all go wrong? How did we get to where we are? That probably sounds like a loaded question as well.
I'm actually working on that.
2 hours.
No, I'm actually working on that issue right now. I'm actually doing quite a deep dive on that particular issue to try and understand exactly where it went wrong. And I'm finding some interesting things. I don't want to preempt it now, but I'm finding some very interesting things, in my little forensic investigation. So the fact is, it has gone wrong. It's gone horribly wrong, and I'm not sure that the genie can be put back in the bottle so easily.
Can I maybe give my take on that?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Because I'm not in the loop with what Tony is doing from that perspective. So maybe to answer just from my perspective, I think it's a combination of 2 decades of underinvestment in infrastructure. Water infrastructure is the lowest priority. If you look at budget, it's a very small ministry at 15 to 18 billion a year. It's lower than electricity for revenue for local government, although national government has its responsibilities. The country is drying up, maybe from the western side of it. We've had some extreme weather where we've had a lot of rainfall in the east of the country in a short period of time, but we've had irregular, less than 50% of the rainfall in the Cape for 3 years in a row, with the Cape having less than a year's storage, the Western Cape, generally speaking, and Gauteng having 2 years storage, if you include Sterkfontein and the likes. I think it's a combination of, in Eskom, well, in electricity, they called it project memory loss. I think in 2 decades, we've lost a lot of the project memory in the skills that we developed through the mining revolution in water resilience, interbasin transfers and all the likes. And that kick-started our water industry, the energy industry and the likes. And I think we're seeing a combination of 2 decades and probably half a decade at least before that of underinvestment. And the current government that's elected is not equipped. And I think very few governments outside of the first world would be equipped for this type of issue. So I think there's no one single answer. I also have some personal feelings where I think if there's not a buck to be made, let's leave it alone. So I'll end there.
Thanks very much.
Can I just respond from one interesting perspective, well, hopefully an interesting perspective. When I was at the CSIR, I sat as the vice chairman of the RAP, the Research Advisory Panel. And at that point in time, the CSIR derived about 30% of its income from what was called parliamentary grant money, PG money. And the purpose of the RAP was to define the strategic research agenda for the entire organization, but then to also oversee the expenditure of money on over those projects. And just a couple of observations are made from that. Okay, the first observation was that there was a project ongoing every single year. It was the Atlantis Aquifer study. We know so much about the Atlantis Aquifer that it's laughable. So I kept on saying to these guys, I kept rattling the cage and saying, okay, so now let's replicate that in other aquifers. Let's go to the Table Mountain Aquifer group. Let's go elsewhere. Let's learn something else from other things. But there was this deep vested interest in making that happen. But the second thing that happened from that experience, and this answers the question now, was there was a growing frustration amongst the scientists, particularly the fellows that were all the senior scientists, that government was not listening to science. So much so that we made a decision at one stage to divert some of the parliamentary grant money into a research project just to understand that issue. And we came up there with a very interesting concept. We came up with the understanding that if government is not listening to science, in a young democracy, the role of science is to then engage with society, to educate society about the matters of their importance. Because you must remember, the CSIR was created by an act of parliament, and the mission of the CSIR is to apply its mind in the national interest in the area of science, engineering, and technology, or to develop a platform in the national interest for science, engineering, and technology. But the flip side of the coin was that the scientists must apply their mind. So they're not just necessarily directed by Parliament, they are empowered to also apply their mind. So we invoked that second part of the clause, and we applied our mind with parliamentary money. We came up with a book called Governance as a Trialogue, Government, Society, Science, and Transition. And the word trialogue was important because it implied that there were 3 different conversations as opposed to a dialogue with 2 people. This is a trialogue with 3 people. And coming out of that was the concept of science in the service of society, and taking that concept to fruition ultimately got me suspended from the organization. So what we're talking about here actually is a progressive undermining of science, or the progressive and slow absolute ignoring of science, to the extent that scientists felt so frustrated. And I'll close off by quoting one of my colleagues at the CSIR. He was always known for his one-line statements that told the story very accurately. And he said that we as scientists have far too long been finding solutions and throwing them over the wall, hoping they hit a passing problem. Okay? And that's pretty much what we were doing. So from that moment onwards, we said, right, we're going to go science in the service of society. How do we as scientists in a National Science Council, sustained to a large extent by public money, how do we work in the public interest? And the more we started going into that terrain, the more pushback we were getting, and ultimately the more the organization was undermined, to the extent that the University of Stellenbosch last year published some very interesting research on the visibility of science in South Africa. And in that, they named the 20 most visible scientists in South Africa, and they also named the most visible institutions. And not one of those top institutions was the CSIR. And I'm not anti-CSIR at all. I'm just mentioning the fact as was expressed in this research program. Not not one of the top institutions was the CSR. In fact, it wasn't mentioned anywhere. But many of the most visible scientists were all former CSR people. So they've all left as a result of purges or whatever, pressures that were taking place there. So ultimately, the bottom line is that major institutions that were established for to avert exactly this kind of issue have been undermined, hollowed out from the beginning, and filled with people that are political appointees that are not necessarily technically competent.
There's a question here from, let's just see who that was. There was a question here from Kirsten asking about how do they prioritize water between schools and business and who takes priority. She was saying that they're allocating 23 million litres per day to schools. Now, I do know that Graham Tech, for example, has made an offer to the city of Cape Town. They've got a plant that is good to go to the value of $2.1 million. They're simply waiting for the go-ahead from the city, and that will address the needs of the business community. If Parliament already made provision for the city's made provision for schools. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I think it's a good marketing effort, and more companies must do it also. But we need 500 to 600 million liters, so 500-600 megaliters. The 10s, the 5s, the 2s. I think there's 22 megaliters of augmentation online, and it's really not. It's going to do absolutely nothing. And I've actually got a snippet from last year when the Mayor of Cape Town said they would put 500 megaliters online, and there's a whole. I've posted it ad nauseum in social media, and that really disturbs me. That 6 months ago we're talking 500, and now we've got 22. So I think talking about what Tony's saying, trust deficit. Yes, you can see why. And I don't see more than 22. So if we add the Graham Tech offer now, maybe it's 24, 25, 26. We need to find 100 to 200 before next month or the middle of the month after. We mustn't be talking tens of megaliters a day. We must be talking 100, 200. And I don't see that of potable water. I'm not talking about yields from boreholes that's untreated.
Okay, so
just getting back to the school thing, can I just say one more thing? Given the fact that schools generally have got school grounds, playing fields, etc., their footprint is often a lot bigger than a normal business would be. Okay, certainly a family business would have a smaller footprint than that. That opens up the possibility of a school potentially drilling a borehole. Now, there's just more land available for to find a possible source of water. So that's something that I would think would be a reasonable strategy. You can bring borehole water online to flush toilets in a school fairly quickly, assuming that you can get drilling contractors, in this current drilling boom at the moment.
Okay, we're going to end this discussion soon. Two questions before we. Considering that the augmented water, the planned augmented water that they're going to bring on is less than 10% of our current usage. Should the inevitable happen that we run out of water in the dam and these augmented schemes have been running late, what kind of scenario are we looking at?
I think Clem Santa spoke about a fishing village in his low road.
Yeah, I think there you're looking at United Nations. Can you please come and help us? Because I'm not aware at that point in time. On the disaster management side, I'm working at the moment with some of the disaster management professionals, and they've got fairly sophisticated plans up and running. But I think personally, I don't believe that the national government has the capacity right now to manage a disaster on that scale, given that Cape Town is only the forerunner, the front runner. Eastern Cape is not very far behind. KZN not very far behind that. So we're looking at a national issue, and at a time of great uncertainty, with this whole transition about the presidency and who's actually going to be in charge and where the priorities lie, etc., etc. So I just think it's going to be, I'm afraid to say, a refugees kind of situation.
America asked, how do we fix this and prevent it from happening again?
So, I didn't quite hear that question. You broke up there.
Okay, I'm going to put it on screen. Bottom line, how do we fix this and how do we prevent this from happening again?
Okay, I think we fix it by because everybody is now so hyper aware of this. If I can offer a professional opinion about where I think we're going to be going after day zero, I think that day zero is a tsunami, literally a tsunami that's going to hit the country. And I'm of the professional opinion that the political landscape is going to change in a fundamental way. I don't believe that the political landscape can survive this tsunami. And part of that shift in the landscape is going to be a fundamental shift in the way we manage water. And one of those things that's going to happen almost inevitably is this whole notion of the nationalization of water under the control of a central authority that seems to lack the capacity to manage it properly, and has also in and of itself become bankrupt, unable to deploy the kind of money needed to fix the problem. So I can see in the post situation, the post-day zero scenario, I can see the emergence of a new business model where you're going to get public-private partnership, but with completely different entities, and you're probably even going to get a change in things like the Public Financial Management Act, which at the moment is an incredible constraint. The city's not allowed to enter into these contracts. So all that's going to happen, and I think ultimately Cape Town is going to become an incredibly resilient city because it'll be the first city in the world to actually go through this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
Did you have a comment there, Benoit?
No, I agree totally. I think the word, I'm going to use it, there's going to be serious regime change. And if we think the political parties who are, let's say, the top 3 or 4 will exist in a year's time, I think we need to rethink that. And I agree the legislation needs to change within the 21st century. And I think the constitution will change to reflect what can work better. And there's 800 billion rands worth of backlog in the water sector alone, and that's what we know of, and those numbers nobody disagrees with. That's a serious number and a serious economic stimulant, but we need, I'm going to use Tony's words, I think we need policy certainty, we need the right pricing for water and the correct economic public-private partnerships to participate in that 800 billion plus more going forward. So I think we have a very good opportunity. We just have to get over this hurdle. And in business circles, the last year, it's been regime change is used quite liberally. And I'm not talking revolution. I'm talking in a democratic manner, but very radical.
Let's end it on a positive note. There's a very good question here from Linda. Linda asks, how would you best encourage ordinary citizens to respond? That's the first question. Second question is, as employers and business people and regular folks, who can we support and how? I think those are pretty encouraging questions.
I think business, from my perspective, needs to take the lead. Encourage access sources of alternative water, encourage people to get their quota from work, do the same with the suppliers and their customers and collaborate. And I think that will stimulate a lot. From a water shortage South Africa perspective, we're involved with a few partners on the disaster management side, where the guys are busy this weekend already in Cape Town to set up secure depots and distribution centers for the vulnerable. And we are not able to talk about these plans because all the stakeholders are involved, including local, provincial, national government. But there's a lot of goodwill there, and we couldn't get hold of much transport 2 months ago. We've got more transport need. And yes, water is the issue, and people are asking why bottled water. It's the fallback that we're stocking up on with quality that's assured. And there is a problem in plastic. The availability of plastic, the supply chains are stretched, but this will change very quickly. So there's a lot happening behind the scenes, and I think we're going to be able to keep the population and the vulnerables from a water shortage South Africa perspective hydrated quite well. We just can't answer all the questions right now, and local government is involved, so they haven't absconded at all. So there is some good collaboration happening on the ground.
Tony, what encouragement have you got for the public at large, and how do you think business can support the communities?
No, I think that it's in human nature. In our darkest hour, we have to reach into ourselves and we have to find some strength that's there. And human beings are remarkably resilient creatures. What happens now is people are going to get pushed out of their comfort zone. But all they're going to do is they're going to learn just what altitude they can fly at. So my words would be one of encouragement. I certainly encourage credible leadership to come forward. I think a large portion of the dilemma today is the fact that people just don't trust any form of leadership. So we need credible leadership, and whether you are the leader at your little block level, at your own household level, and in fact, just recently, someone confided in me, a woman. She said she was terrified by what's coming, but she's been working feverishly, checking up on her neighbors, etc. And my advice to her was, deflect all of your fear into helping your neighbors, because that way you're managing something constructive, something positive, and ultimately through helping others, you are now also helping yourself. And that's a kind of closing message that I would like to give you, that we actually have got enormous strength within us, but we don't always realize it.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your contribution this evening, and I'm glad that we could end this on a positive note. And we hope that we've answered your questions. Those of the questions we've not been able to get to, we will try and answer them after the session, but we really have to end now. So thank you everyone for joining. Benoit, thank you for your time. Tony, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining, everyone. Thank you for your comments. So from us, good night for now.
Au revoir.
Good night.